Yo, Mono Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom, good evening. Goeienaand. Dumelang, bagaitso. There's really not much to say, except those of you who pay attention have seen the script before. We've seen how the EFF are ever the opportunists, the media whores that they are, will always find an incident like this to firstly racialize, deeply racialize, attempt to drive a racial wedge into it, and then capitalize, of course, from the tension that rises from that, capitalize on the media attention that rises from the consequent racial tensions that they sow. And it's quite clear to anybody watching what's happening with their protest out in Phoenix at the moment, that it is dotted with hypocrisy and racism. And I'll deal with those two things in this short vlog. The hypocrisy, firstly, is this. This is the same EFF that is gathering in their hundreds at the moment, as they've been doing throughout this lockdown, This is the same EFF that's going to be telling us in a few days, once they're done getting attention from Phoenix, out of Phoenix rather, same EFF that'll be telling us, oh, well, you know, we should actually postpone elections because, you know, we shouldn't gather in crowds because of the Delta variant. They'll probably grift. They'll probably enter the COVID grift and use it also. And they'll probably side with the IEC and say, well, you know, we agree with IEC that everything is short notice. There's also the risk of COVID-19. This won't be a free and fair election. Let's postpone to February. That'll probably be the EFF. The same EFF that's been meeting in crowds, amassing, you know, with not a care in the world for COVID-19. That EFF will now turn around, will flip-flop, as we've become accustomed to them, and suddenly argue, no, there's just too much danger in people gathering, especially for an election in November or October. That's the first. I just had to point out the hypocrisy, was the first thing I had to point out. To which case it brings me to the second issue. And again, I'll happily retract if the EFF says, you know what, we'd like to prove everybody wrong. We're ready for elections now, and we demand elections happen now. If the EFF say that, I'll happily retract that first assessment. But as things are, we know the EFF and their track record of flip-flopping. And we know that no matter how much they project, you've got to remember, the EFF is a party of the mainstream media and social media. It talks a lot. You often hear a lot of EFF types, the EFF douchebags. They'll talk a lot about how they are part of the masses and all black folks support the EFF, but that's definitely not reflected in the numbers and the votes. EFF are a 12% party in this country. 12% party in this country. 88% of South Africans who are voting age have said no to the EFF. So all their claims of being part of the masses, and that today, for example, as I've seen on social media, was the masses speaking, is absolute poppycock. They are a fringe group and they continue to be. Yeah, they'll see some growth, I'm sure they will, because people are that frustrated by the ANC, but the EFF remain a fringe group who most people, most rational, faith, flag, family, and freedom type South Africans look in the EFF and say, that riffraff is trash. I'd rather die than put on a red beret like that. First point that I want to get out of the way. The second point is exactly this. Remember I said there's hypocrisy and there's racism here. And as I say the racism, the EFF now will perk up. Well, there we go. Big Daddy's finally going to speak about those racist Indians they've been telling us the whole time. Indians are racist, they'll tell us. You know, Indians, much like whites, hate blacks. Look at how they massacred black people in Phoenix. That's the narrative we're being sold at the moment under the hashtag EFF in Phoenix. There is a blanket casting of aspersion, of racism, of minorities in this country. And the EFF are part of that broad leftist coalition of the ANC, the radical economic transformation types, the RET douchebags, and of course the EFF, red in tooth and claw commies, socialists and leftists, who are desperate to be on top of the narrative again. And that narrative is, oh, look at us, we know what we're doing, we've got the right policies and the like. After the looting and the social unrest basically proved that South Africans were sick and tired of the status quo. The status quo is represented by the ANC, the RET types, and the EFF. Don't let them fool you into thinking South Africa is some deeply capitalist country that's creating all of the inequality. Bullcrap. South Africa is the status quo of what the left want. Political control, where politicians decide winners and losers, and invariably the friends of politicians are the winners. That is the status quo right now. That is what characterizes the South African economy. It is a crony system. It's cronyism that dictates South Africa. And the EFF are very happy with that, by the way, because what they want is to replace the ANC's crony system with their own crony system, where their politicians will be in power, their politicians will decide who are the winners and losers in society. That's why they hate liberty. They hate freedom, the things that I often talk about. They hate it when I talk about the individual being the most powerful entity in society. They hate it even more when I talk about resources and power residing in the hands of families and individuals and not politicians and their friends. They don't like that shit. No, they don't like that. They want the state to be in control of things. Don't believe me? As a small digression, let's talk about the EFF's land policy. The EFF have no intention of giving Black South Africans who've been dispossessed because of our history. They have no intention of giving those South Africans their land with property rights, title deeds, and secure title. No intention of doing that. Instead, the EFF want to nationalize all land. In other words, land must be controlled by politicians and government. Nationalize that land and then create a society of renters. The same Black South Africans who were disenfranchised and dispossessed historically will now become renters of the land they live on under an EFF dispensation. That's what they're really calling for. So that when you understand the EFF, understand that they represent part of the status quo. Part of the status quo, and trust you me, they are going to get so pissed off when they watch me reveal this truth about them. You'll see them lose their minds in the comment section just now. Shut up, fatty. Shut up, you sellout coon, Uncle Tom, blah, 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 blah. They're coming. They're coming because the one thing the EFF cannot stand is the truth being told about them, that they're actually anti-Black, and that what they really are is pro-communism. And those two things are not synonymous. But let me come back. Let me come back to the racism that I was talking about here. Let me come back to the racism that I was talking about here. There is an attempt right now by the ANC, the Zuma faction, which is closely yoked to the RET faction, that's the Radical Economic Transformation faction, and the EFF. There is a massive attempt, including some of their friends, their woke friends in the mainstream media, to dribble and distract you into forgetting that, number one, the looting and the public violence and the civil unrest and the riots we saw was instigated by the Zuma and RET factions, and the EFF was strategically silent at the time because they were hoping to benefit from it politically. They're strategically quiet about that. As I said, it was instigated by the Zuma instigators, the RET factions, and the EFF was strategically quiet because it saw itself as the beneficiary of the anarchy. And why? Because by and large, they saw themselves as being in control of the looting, the violence, and the anarchy. And then when it all went to shit very quickly, everybody suddenly said, oh, it wasn't us, it wasn't us, it wasn't us. We're not responsible for this. Because the political fallout was terrible. And something happened that they were not expecting. Ordinary South Africans banded together to protect themselves. And one step further, in the chaos that they unleashed, the same chaos that the EFF was quiet about strategically because they were hoping to benefit, in that chaos, 330 South Africans plus, nearly all of them by government accounts, nearly all of them were Black South Africans, died and were murdered in that incident. So that you need to understand something. If you want to play the race-blaming game, then surely the finger is pointed to you, dear Black politicians. Whether you're part of the Zuma instigating crowd, the RET crowd, or the EFF that was strategically quiet. It was those individuals that saw the bulk of Black South Africans, primarily poor folks, dying during the looting, the unrest, and the violence. 330. And why did those 330 people die? It was because of a failure of, again, if you want to play the race game, I'm playing your game here, I'm playing your game, the race game. If you want to play that race game as to why those people died, well, it was initially because it was people supporting a Black politician, Jacob Zuma, instigating that violence. They were the actual cause of the violence that saw Black folk primarily die. And number two, a so-called Black government. That's how they self-describe sometimes. You know, they often claim to be the paragon of Blackness. Those in government, the ANC and those types. That same government that claims to be pro-Black failed to protect life, liberty, and property rights. And number two, saw, because of that failure, primarily Black people dying. Yet the EFF is dead quiet about that. Dead quiet about that. Over 300 Black lives were snuffed out in violence that was caused by the people who claim to be pro-Black. And yet that same EFF will then play along with the ANC in trying to dribble and distract us, to somehow paint the picture that no, all of that violence and the murder, those racist Indians. That's the game they're playing. So that you understand why I get frustrated and I want to call out their bullshit. Whoa, I just swore. That's how you know my ass is angry. There is a scapegoating of minorities, and I warned you that this is coming. As they realize, as the ANC, the Zuma faction, the RET faction, and the EFF realized, as they realized that electorally people were put off by what they saw, and that suddenly there was a recognition that the status quo is driven by those guys, they then tried to step back and say, no, this wasn't us. And worse yet, they tried to dribble and distract you by saying, no, it's those Indians who are racist. As you hear the EFF, under this hashtag EFF is EFF in Phoenix hashtag. It's a distraction. You're being dribbled. Hashtag don't be dribbled, as I often say on the show. Does it not surprise you that the likes of Begicele, under pressure, of course, because that failure that I described has him at the center. The failure to uphold law and order and the rule of law that saw those 300 Black lives being lost. Whose failure do you really think that is? At the top of those who I would apportion blame to would be your beloved Cyril Ramaphosa, who's at the head of law enforcement and armed forces in this country. Failed. In fact, he ducked and dived, went to his nice mansion in Cape Town, in Ladadno, and hid whilst the rest of this country was fighting off lawlessness. Where was Begicele during that? Quiet as a mouse. As his police force, God bless them, because they're led by absolute idiots. Our police are actually good people trying to do their job, but they're just led at a management level by idiots, and of course at a political level by an asshat. How do we know this? Because when the doo-doo hit the fan, those same police officers committed to trying to enforce the law realized they don't have the resources, and they came begging to the private sector for things like rubber bullets, manpower even to assist. A failure of the state, the politicians, the same politicians who are now dribbling and distracting you in order to remove their culpability, and they're blaming minorities. Now, as I say this, let me quickly add this. Insofar as Phoenix, where there were cases of law breaking and even murder, absolutely. Let the state, that same state that failed, by the way, I'm cognizant of that, but that same state needs to get its act together. Police and the courts need to lead the charge in what's happening in Phoenix right now. Not these race grifting politicians, and definitely not the asshat as a politician, or even Julius Malema and the EFF, who are there to try and raise racial tensions. What we need now is the state to play its actual role, insofar as the police bringing prosecutions to the NPA putting forward a strong case, and of course seeing convictions where there were cases of law being broken there. Because of course there were families who have lost loved ones unjustly in Phoenix and in other parts of the country. Of course there was that. But that should be a function, as I said, of law and the criminal justice system, not race-baiting politicians who are trying to use Indians as a scapegoat. And again, I say Indians, really, that their target is minorities. And I warned you that this was coming. So that's it. Don't be dribbled. Don't be dribbled. And shout out to the Phoenix community. Please resist all attempts by the media and politicians to try and paint you as the racist that they claim you are. If anything, that community needs to band together. It needs to follow the model of unity, organizing, and mobilizing. And those who are the lawbreakers, those who were the murderers, bring them out to face justice. That's what a responsible community does. And I have every belief in South Africans, and I have every belief in residents of Phoenix, that they will isolate those who broke the law. Because unlike what the EFF will have you believe, those people don't represent Indian people broadly, firstly, or even residents of Phoenix. No matter how much things got out of hand. And that is the sort of calm, rational approach that you would expect leadership would show in a situation like this, but no. If anything, political leaders are heading down to Phoenix like they did in Senekal, like they did in Brackenfell. I can go down the line. Not to calm things, but to raise racial tensions and to effectively blame minorities for what is effectively a failure of those very same politicians who claim to be pro-Black. Over 330 Black lives were lost in this country during the Zuma instigated violence, public violence, and looting. Lost, Black lives lost, actually at the hands of Black politicians. If you really want to play the race game and the race blame. And it's that lack of introspection by those who claim to represent Blackness that I find to be incredibly laughable. Choice is yours, dear South African, as to what future you want. Do you want to continue, rather, to be dribbled and distracted by these race-grifting, hateful leftist politicians? Or do you choose the alternative, where when we begin to see South Africans as individuals, as really families, fellow families, where we inculcate a value system, a culture of a love for our faith as South Africans, flag, family, and of course our freedoms. And that the collective mission, therefore, the collective mission of South Africans who are of that type, of that caste, is to build a prosperous, property-owning, non-racial, and free South Africa. Those are the two competing visions you have here. Choice is yours, man. Choice is yours. But I, for one, will not be dribbled and fooled by a political elite who are trying to shift blame right now for their own failures and really their own toxic environment. Trying to poison the well. When in real terms, who should be leading, the loudest voices in the room, when it comes to Phoenix or any of that unrest should be the police, insofar as them saying, this is how far we are in our investigations. We're bringing dockets to the National Prosecuting Authority. And the NPA, of course, also should be the loudest voice in the room. This is how far in preparing these cases to take them to court. Arrests have been made and people are facing justice. That's what's needed now to return calm to a situation like this. And if that happens, especially if the courts then, with good evidence and a good case, find these people guilty and restores our faith in the criminal justice system, if those three things, that causal chain of things happens, it shuts out and it quietens the space for the racial grifters, the race-baiting politicians, and the activists, the likes of your Jackie Shandus. Jackie Shandu, of course, of the one Indian, one bullet infamy. Hateful, hateful people, hate-driven people who are targeting minorities in this country as a scapegoat. That's what I always say to you guys. I'm not an anarchist. I'm a classical liberal. I do believe the state has a role to play. And the role of the state should be law enforcement and upholding law and order. And it's been the failure of that that is seeing this situation play out as it has. So as I said, to conclude, let those be the loudest voices in the room. Police, NPA, the courts. Bringing those who broke the law to justice to return calm, law and order to this country. That is what is desperately needed if this country is to not only endure, but prosper. Begin to talk the language to prosper. And I see a comment, Lelo Kankyovu, but the judiciary itself is captured. Will the court step up from where law enforcement failed? That is a brilliant question, Wimpo. That is a brilliant question, but it's one in which the politicians should be asking, not trying to divide us, but race. The politicians themselves, the people you and I call leadership, should be at the front of that conversation, if anything. Putting pressure on the ANC. And also at the same time, the ANC just need to lose now. But anyway, that's another conversation for another day. What the political leadership should not be doing is inflaming things. Wusa. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. And I hope you realize why I really don't pay much attention to the EFF types. Because they don't actually contribute to the conversation in this country. For them, this is all about electioneering and being seen to be doing something when really that something is useless. If anything, that something that they're doing is even counterproductive. It's driving a racial wedge between this country, and it's just not necessary. Not necessary. Don't be dribbled. Hashtag don't be dribbled. And if Black lives really care, pardon me, if Black lives really matter, as they would have us believe, and often they claim to be the paragons of all things Black, then if anything, we need, if anything, we need a ramping up of law enforcement and quality investigations into all of those 330 people who died. Especially those who are the reason for those Black lives being lost, which is Black politicians invariably, who often hide behind different brands. Either they're in the ANC, the Zuma faction in particular, particularly the Zuma instigators, the RET faction, and even the EFF. Accountability is important, very important. That's the conversation we need to be having, especially as Black folk. Instead of out here trying to blame minorities for all of the things that clearly they, as the so-called Black politicians, are failing at. Again, I'm speaking in these racial terms because I'm playing their game. Those of you who know me know that I'm a devout non-racialist in my approach. But for a moment, I thought, let me play their game so that they realize that we can see their grift. And we can see their scapegoating. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Thanks for watching. And yeah, I super appreciate it, guys. I'll see you on Sunday for the Big Daddy Liberty, pardon me, for Liberty and Friends. Yeah, let me know what you think. about this vlog. Throw some comments in it. Make sure you hit that like button, people. Let's get this video to spread far and wide. Hit that like button and let me know what you think. Even if you disagree with me, let me know what you think. Especially if you're an EFF member and you're watching this. Don't just say, oh, you're fat, blah, blah, blah. Shut up, Stuga, Uncle Tom, blah, 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 Coon. None of that shit affects me. But come with a reasoned argument. Why am I wrong about this? Why am I wrong about this if I am? It's time you guys catch up now. Y'all talk about superior logic all the time, but you damn well don't show any of that shit. Well, then show me. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on Sunday for Liberty and Friends. And yeah, man, a reminder to you, as I always say at the end of every broadcast, never trust a commie.